to a new person who just started YouTube, what would you tell them to start off with? Going niche or going with something really trendy?
It's important that they understand it's not just about the content, it's also about the business. Not only do they not own the platforms, they often don't own even the content.
What do you think would be the most reliable platform for content creating in your experience?
It's not a perfect platform and it's not necessarily that easy, but it is a platform that does value for the creators.
Biggest misconception, content creators don't really get that.
PewDiePie had 100 million followers, but he did not have the most success commercially because a lot of his followers were hate watching. For about 3 years, Forbes magazine listed Markiplier as the most successful creator in the world. Markiplier only at that time had about 20 million followers.
How do you think Mr. Beast can stay consistent over the next 20 years?
Predicting where the industry is going to be in 10 years, harder than it's ever been before.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today in this video, we're going to be talking about the multi-billion-dollar industry, content creation, how it works and who really owns it. We're going to be interviewing an expert in this field, Dr. Craig, from University of Southern California, Annenberg in the School of Journalism and Communication. So let's get right into the video, and I hope that you learned something today. So here, guys, I'm with Professor Craig, and today, well, we're going to be going over the creator economy and how it's just such a dynamic type of economy. So, hi, thank you for being here. I'm so excited for being here. And, well, let's go on with the first question. What inspired you to get into this domain? What made you go into the creator economy?
So I'm a Hollywood producer who spent 30 years producing television and film, and then started to teach graduate courses in how media industries work and production at University of Southern California in the Annenberg School for Communication. About 12 years ago, my students were asking me if they could do their research and projects around YouTubers. And I honestly didn't know what a YouTuber was at that point, which just reveals how old I am. And before I agreed to let them do that research, I thought I better find out what it is. At that exact moment, a professor, very renowned, very accomplished communication professor named Stuart Cunningham, approached me for some assistance on his project, which was studying YouTubers. So it began as a very small little project. We were going to do 3 or 4 interviews and talk to some YouTubers and see if we could figure out what makes a YouTuber different from a filmmaker or a Hollywood producer or a television showrunner. That project has, over the last 11 years, turned into 3 published books mapping this entirely new and distinctive media industry, including the Chinese version that has emerged off of Chinese platforms. I've now traveled the world 3 times over studying creators all over the world. And obviously this includes creators who work on and across many platforms, not just YouTube, but TikTok and Xiaohongshu and doing many different types of practices.
So after hearing your students talk about YouTube, you just fell in love with it immediately, right? So you had like these small projects and then you just fell in love with it immediately, right?
I think what I fell in love with was the fact that there were, at that time, hundreds of thousands of people who were harnessing these platforms to do something beyond just social communication, that they were finding ways to build online communities and then monetize them. And that was a very radical departure from what Hollywood does. So I was more fascinated than I would say falling in love with them, and eager to see a new generation of humans harnessing technology in ways that reflects their own interests and their needs and gives them a certain amount of agency and power that media industries often don't give. But yeah, it was more of a fascination that continues to grow every day.
So you're saying that you just found like a new market, a new industry. So you just got interested into it. Like you said, passionate. You found a passion in that.
More like a researcher and a scientist who discovers. Actually, people like to refer to me as an anthropologist who discovered a new world. And that's very flattering. But it was a world that young people, particularly, although in other countries and many other cultures, it was people of all ages were discovering how to harness this technology. So yeah, as a scientist, I was quite curious about this, but also as a teacher, I needed to have a deeper understanding of this world if I was going to allow my students to then conduct research and also pursue careers in this world.
All right. And so from your research, who do you think had the most power in the creator economy? Like, for example, from advertisement, YouTubers, what do you think had the most amount of power and significance?
So often the easiest answer or the most obvious answer is the platforms themselves, because without the platforms, creators don't exist. So it's a codependent kind of model in which they must have access and the ability to use these platforms even though they use the platforms often in ways that the platforms don't intend or don't necessarily support or recognize. The easier answer is the technology and the platforms. But I do want to introduce what I think is the most powerful, most important aspect of this economy to think about is the government itself. Every government across the world is considering and taking into account the power of these platforms to disrupt society and the economy. Some governments see creators as the very forward edge and front edge of the growth of their digital economy, and they're not particularly supportive, but they're also not trying to shut them down or regulate them or prevent them from doing what they do best. But there are any number of countries now engaging in what we call platform nationalism. So, for example, India overnight shut down almost 500 Chinese apps, including TikTok, which immediately eliminated the ability of these platforms to generate revenue. As we know, the US has forced TikTok to sell off its US business.
Yeah, it's different, right? It's the TikTok in the East and the West and all these creators. It's a bit of like a different, like users, different viewers, right? So it's also
Correct.
they have to adapt. And would you say necessarily that being a content creator is like renting a room compared to actually having a job and kind of owning it? Would you use that analogy?
I like to think of it as they're renting a mobile home. It's a place where they can live and they can support themselves, but they have to constantly move around, whether it's changing the way they operate on a single platform or moving onto other platforms, or the fact that the platforms are constantly changing their algorithms, which means they have to seek out new ways to find their online community.
Right, because they're moving from the trends.
So it's constantly moving, but it's definitely a rent-based proposition. They don't own, not only do they not own the platforms, they often don't own even the content, and they certainly don't own their community. And that's the sort of thing that makes this career particularly challenging, is they don't own the people who follow them, and the followers can be sometimes very difficult to sustain.
Yeah, they could be maybe continuously reporting and then eventually lose their account. And if they lose their account, then they lose everything.
Yeah, there's a number of ways that creators have lost their followers, but the most successful creators and the most sustainable careers have been creators who understood the importance of maintaining and figuring out how to continue to build a relationship with their community, no matter how big they become and no matter where they're located, no matter what kind of content or interests they have.
Yeah, of course, having then the community to always like back you up, and also on other platforms. So what would you say would be the biggest misconception and creators have about how the economy really works? Because as you said, of course, it changes, like the market changes from the West to the East. You have a Chinese TikTok, you have other TikToks. And also, as you said, it can really just go away in a snap. What do you think would be the biggest misconception or thing that content creators don't really get and that separates them from the top 1%, like you said?
Right. So when it comes to creators, especially creators trying to enter into this market and enter into the space, is they often think they either think it's about creating content. Yes, content is absolutely the vehicle to communicate with your community and build that relationship with your community. But it isn't about the nature of the content itself. It isn't like Hollywood. You're not making Game of Thrones in your bedroom. It's important that they understand it's not just about the content. It's also about the business, and it's also about the community. So these three legs of the creator business is what makes creator culture and the creator economy sustainable. A lot of creators coming into this don't understand the business side of it, which is very strategic and very important. And a lot of them just simply do not value and place their community at the very center of what they do. So if you look at the very broad notion of creators, I like to refer to them as for-profit online community organizers. They build online community across platforms through content practices, but also through all sorts of engagement, liking, sharing, commenting, doing live streaming where they can go into the chat room and hear directly from their community, going on to direct messaging platforms like Discord where they can actually have a conversation with their community, even live meetups or something that creators have developed to do that.
So you're saying that the biggest misconception people have to look over is, as first of all, you said, it's not like, of course, building Game of Thrones overnight. It's not that deep. It's not that you don't spend that much time per video. It's more per se going for the trend and it's really strategic, not really time consuming. And then again, as you said, the community also really helps and matters. So it's, as you said, very strategic. So you have to build the community. You have to try to make that structured with your channel and try to really embed everything around that. There's even like Discord, I heard, where people get like huge fan bases. And of course, there's a lot of planning put into it compared to like movies where there might not be that much community or that much different platforms that you can access from it. Like, it's not that accessible compared to movies. Like, you can literally be anywhere, anytime, on so many different platforms, and it's just way more versatile and strategic, as you said.
It's a very different type of business. And there's a mistake to think of creators as content creators. Of course, the content is incredibly important, but it isn't necessarily about creating content similar to what you see in traditional or legacy media. I like to think of the content as social content, content that is designed to encourage social engagement, social interactivity, to foster and nurture and support and represent the interests of not only yourself, but also your online community who is spending a lot of time with you, and they are the basis upon which you're making almost all of your money. Whereas in Hollywood, the intellectual property is the underlying rationale for how the entire industry works, from movies and television to theme parks and plush toys. It all depends on who owns the intellectual property. In creator culture, it's about who has the deepest, most meaningful, and largest scale engagement with their online community. That is the coin of the realm. That is the very crux of what goes on with the success of creators, whether they're game players on Twitch or Bilibili, or they are fashion creators and beauty and lifestyle creators on Instagram and Xiaohongshu, or they are live selling creators who now dominate the e-commerce world, selling live streaming, going for hours on a day, selling content or promoting.
Yeah, no matter what,
products.
it boils down to the community. Of course.
Yeah.
No matter, like you said, doing gaming or doing podcasts or anything always boils down to the community. And if you have like a strong community that actually likes yourself and your brand, then of course that can also help a long way. I mean, as you said, it's the key to the whole thing. You need to have a strong community to back you up, and that's where everything's going to come from. Because if you don't have a community, then who are you going to sell your stuff to? And
Mr. Beast is the best example of that. Mr. Beast created social content. His content is very high end and very well produced. So I would put this up next to any other kind of content out there. So he's unique in that way. But his content is always gamified. All of his content is about encourage people not only to watch, but also to apply, to engage, to maybe even win the games. And that's the genius of Mr. Beast. But in doing that, he's now managed to turn that massive online community into dozens of different business models and revenue streams.
Yes, the community just made everything happen. What do you think would be the most reliable platform for content creating in your experience? What do you think in the past has been the most consistent and the most reliable to actually use?
YouTube has consistently been the most creator friendly. They have, even more so today than when they started 20 years ago, they routinely refer to themselves as a creator led platform. They have instituted a number of very clever ways to monetize content on the platform. It's not a perfect platform, and it's not necessarily that easy to be successful on the platform, but it is a platform that does value the creators and offers them many different forms of monetization, many different revenue streams. The biggest weakness, of course, for YouTube is that it doesn't have a very strong social graph. It's really hard to engage your community on YouTube. Most people don't end up looking at the comments because they live below the screen. Most YouTubers have also developed a multi-platform strategy, and that includes going across other platforms that are better at social engagement, interactivity, and being able to, yeah. So, that's one of the biggest distinctions. But I would say that YouTube has traditionally been or has continued to be very appreciative and centered the role of the creators in their success as a platform, which is formidable. YouTube is the biggest platform in the world now. But other platforms, they are begrudgingly interested in creators, but they often do not give the creators as much opportunities to succeed as YouTube does.
Right. And people always talk about being consistent. People always talk about those key things, consistent, good content, community, all of that. And in reality, do you think that consistent content and all these other factors, do you think that they really matter? Like, of course they matter, but do you think that they matter, but let's say in a different way? So like, how do you think serious content creators should think about them? And how do you think we should actually apply them? Because a lot of things, like, for example, posting consistently. It's not only posting consistently, right? It's also posting at the right time, at the right this and that. So what do you think are like the biggest factors that serious creators should really think about? And how do you think that they should think of it? Yeah.
I found, and this can change very quickly depending on what the platforms do, but I found that it's about understanding that if you're building a relationship with an online community around the world and you disappear for extended lengths of time, that relationship will wane. People will start to seek out other relationships. They will want to spend more time with other creators. So if you start with the core value proposition of my strength, of my business and my influence in the world and across platforms is built on the ability to spend time with my community, then it's about developing mechanisms to do that that are most effective. That means posting content at the right time of day, if not every day, but also varies wildly. If you're a game player and you're not spending 8 hours a day every day playing games with your online community, they're going to go somewhere else. But if you're a podcaster, that's a different value proposition. So you're only going to have so many interviews to post a week. But then you can also engage with the community in other ways across other platforms, whether it's just a quick check-in or a follow-up with the community about the interviews and ask them questions, what they found meaningful from the conversation. Think of it as a daily discussion that's happening between you and millions of other people who are interested in the sort of conversations you're having online. That's, I found, the most useful way to describe what creators do best.
So you're saying that all your content and all of your everything that you do should always revolve around your community, such as the time and what you do and how long you should be doing it. And of course, as you gave the example perfectly with the podcast and the game, it's different, right? So the community, as you said, you have to be consistent, and you should try to, of course, cope with what they want, try to be really in that connection. So you're saying that the most important thing is to, of course, everything boils down to the community. And you're also saying that whatever you do, it like has a different kind of value, as you said, like a value proposition, like podcast and the timings. But yeah,
in the case for your business, obviously, at time, the most important thing is that the community feels that you are trustful, that you are loyal, that you are not only loyal to them, but that you are representing these interviews that you've been producing in a fair way, that you are genuine about your interest in what your interview subjects have to say and your goal of trying to share knowledge with the world in this way. That is a way of what we call performing authenticity. I mean, off screen, you have your own private life and your own existence that should be protected and guarded and doesn't need to be shared. But your on-screen presence here has to be rooted in some form of authenticity or genuineness. I mean, a real sense of I'm sincere about wanting to share this information with the world, and I take my community's interest very closely to heart.
Yes, as I said, the genuine thing is also a big factor, as nowadays we start seeing less and less. And going back to the point how content differs around the world, and you might see more pranks or brain rot around west of the world and then east, of course, like in China, you have so many regulations that you don't really have much of that nonsense. What do you think differs between these different markets and places around the world, especially the west and east?
So there's a couple of things. There are, without a doubt, global or transnational verticals of content that do well on every platform all over the world. We've talked about it already: beauty, lifestyle, gameplay, and vlogging, which includes vodcasting like we're doing right now. These sort of more conversational, discursive, everyday kinds of interactions with you just simply asking questions to people that you're interested in what they have to say. So those are the biggest three, if you will, verticals of content that succeed all over the world. But then you have really, really important and critical distinctions within different markets. And these markets may be national markets, meaning platforms that only succeed within certain areas, within certain cultures that transcend national boundaries, with certain language markets. So some content does better in certain languages than other content. So English isn't the only understood content, and Spanish language and Chinese language content is obviously really spectacularly powerful. And then you have some vast distinctions in terms of the way in which the government and the platforms are encouraging creators. So throughout China and throughout most of East Asia and South Asia, the biggest growing type of content is the live streaming e-commerce seller creator. that person who spends 6, 8, 10 hours a day talking about products that they often know well and they specialize in. But from the surface, it looks like it's just kind of a weird version of Home Shopping Club. It's just, watching people in a grocery store telling you what to buy. But it goes much deeper than that. And they still manage, even in that peculiar context, to still foster and nurture and develop some sort of relationship with their viewers, their followers. And that relationship is critical to their success.
Right. And as you said, of course, a lot of content always stays consistent throughout the world. But things like pranks, as an example, doesn't really work in the more eastern side, of course. But yeah, right. Do you think that these channels which really just, which have a more specific, rare language, which is not English, do you think that those viewers are more special to the channel? Do you think that they value more? Because English channels, you see them everywhere. And I don't know how to explain this, but I just find that the channels which are in the specific language, they just seem to attract and have like these kind of viewers who just feel more dedicated.
I would agree completely. It has to do with the fact that this is not the only cultural industry in the world, not the only global cultural industry. Obviously, the legacy media industries of film and television, particularly those dominated by the US, at least for the 20th century, less so today, have imposed upon a world a certain way of understanding the world, and that is often defined by Hollywood, defined by English, defined by the West, defined by a certain sort of set of values and identity and ideology. But you even find this, for example, in India, where Bollywood is the dominant media industry, but Bollywood only represents a very small portion of Indian culture, which is so spectacularly diverse and pluralistic. So what happens then is that creator cultures in that context tend to be much more engaging and be much more loyal and much more excited to finally see creators who represent themselves, who represent not only their culture, but speak their language. So I would totally agree with you, Ettan, that this new cultural industry is in response to the other cultural industry of legacy media, and the greater level of engagement and deeper level of meaning and value is for communities that have felt underrepresented in traditional media. So if you look to the Middle East, for example, quite truthfully, a lot of media in the Middle East does not represent the interest of young people, does not represent the spectacular curiosity that young people have about the world and about many cultures and about different types of content and lifestyles. And that has allowed for creators, Middle East creators, to just explode in terms of their ability to harness and build an online community. There are particularly beauty and lifestyle creators like Noura Beauty, immediately understood, wait a second, her world, her identity, and her ideas around beauty and lifestyle are not reflected in the beauty industries. So she found that community that was interested in that. And then she turned that community into one of the most successful beauty brands in the world. So again, I think you're right. It's a combination of identifying communities of interest that share your same values, whether it's language, culture, identity, ideology, politics, religion, or curiosity. And if that isn't something that is prevalent and reflected in your own legacy media, there's a greater probability you might tap into that with your creator business.
So you're saying going with the niche channels, since, as you said, you have channels in the Middle East which have exploded because people can more or less relate. So would you say that content creators who do something very specific, for example, on Twitch, if I were to maybe make this podcast live, which is pretty niche, not many people do that. I mean, I don't do that yet, but if I were to do that, do you think that type of channel would definitely be way easier to be the number one, because you wouldn't really be competing for anybody else, because no one really would do that. But do you think that it would be easier to do something really niche and be really famous from doing something really niche? Or do you think it would be really easy to go from, I don't know, playing a game like one of the most famous games, I don't know, Fortnite? Which one do you think would be easier? And I also heard that most gaming YouTubers, actually, the ones that really blow up are the ones who play the latest famous game. So which one do you think is actually the easiest? Which one do you think not only is the easiest to blow up in the beginning, but also to stay consistent? And which one do you think is the overall better path? Going niche or going with something really trendy and have a lot of competition?
Well, that's a complicated question, and it has to do with what do you mean by going to number one? And I'll give you the best example. for many years, there was a YouTuber creator base, a guy named PewDiePie. And PewDiePie had 100 million followers, but he did not have the most success commercially because a lot of his followers were hate watching. He was quite notorious for doing a lot of scandalous content that caused a series of backlashes. So he was able to go viral with a lot of very provocative and sometimes embarrassing, if not really reprehensible content. He's now completely changed his pattern, by the way. He's settled down and he's much more mature and he's settled into a much more sustainable business. But as a result of that, he had 100 million followers, but he did not make the most money. He was not number one. Instead, for about 3 years, Forbes magazine listed Markiplier as the most successful creator in the world. Markiplier only at that time had about 20 million followers. But these were followers who were much more deeply engaged in the sort of interests that Markiplier had, including the games that he was playing. And then he converted them into audiences for his podcast. And just this past weekend, he wrote, produced, starred, directed, and marketed and distributed his own feature film, which has been number one in the box office in the United States.
Yes, I've heard of that. I think it had to be taken down or something.
No, it wasn't taken down. Was just not, the box office charts did not mention his film because it was not distributed through the traditional film studios. They came back and republished the list where it revealed that his film was the most successful. And he's now made in record time 10 times more money at the box office than the film cost in about 10 days. So he's had spectacular success, but it was built on having harnessed and developed an online community that was very much engaged with the sort of things that he cared about. And that included not just watching and following his content, but he has for years, for example, raised millions of dollars for various social causes that were important to him, that his community also cared about. And that is another example of what the best creators do, is they are representatives of an online community. They engage in various content practices to represent that community. Mr. Beast, as you know, is one of the most philanthropic creators in the world, while also one of the most commercially successful. That's not a coincidence. That's because both of their businesses are rooted around understanding that you don't have to have the largest community. You just have to have the most loyal and faithful community who trusts you, who supports you, who's willing to click on that brand if you recommend it, who's willing to go to the movie theater if you're producing it, who's willing to download that game or purchase that snack bar.
What would be your, how do you think people should build that kind of community? Because it doesn't go overnight. That takes a long time. It's like forging a relationship with anyone else in the world. What would you say would be the best way to actually, for anyone really on YouTube to start forging that new community? And what platform do you think they should use, like maybe Discord? And how do you think they should do it?
I would say it starts with a profound and deep understanding of what it is you represent as a human being, as a person of interest who has your own identity and your own values and your own sorts of fascination and curiosity of the world. If you look at the way in which almost all the successful, sustainable creators over the last 20 years have continued to maintain their business, it's honing to what it is they're interested in and not always chasing clout or chasing trends or trying to pivot to a new sort of content or format. It does not last. So in order to be able to find an online community that's interested in you, it means first understanding better who you are and what interests you. So if you look at the child creator, EvanTube, who's now 17 years old, so he's not a kid anymore. It started with a genuine fascination with toys and games and products that he was fascinated in as a child. And that helped him build an online community that may never even be able to afford those toys, but were able to live vicariously through his pleasure that he got in being able to play with and enjoy those toys. That's a remarkable exception. But there are many instances of creators who continue to grow their community by constantly checking in with who they are as a person, as a member of culture and society in terms of their own identities.
You're saying that you should tell yourself who do you think you are, and you should always be consistent. I think that if that is that your point?
Yes, very much.
I think that I forgot the name, but there was some YouTuber I remember. Everyone, I remember when I was younger, would watch on Minecraft YouTuber. I forgot the name, but I think it was like Stampede Longhead or something. But I remember it was always a consistent character. It was always that one happy, consistent voice and message that was being bringed. But I get your point. You're saying that you should find who you are and your character and just stay consistent. Because if someone likes you and to build a community, you're going to be able to bring and deliver that same reaction, that same energy, that same emotion, and that same person every single time, no matter what happens, really.
And not to get too confusing or psychological about this, but who you are is always subject to change. We are always evolving as human beings, and our identity and our interest will continue to evolve. So does your community. So I've seen a lot of instances where there are creators who feel trapped by their community, that they aren't allowed to change, that they can't evolve, that they are too afraid. All of their brand deals are predicated on being able to reach a certain demographic. And if they start to show interest in other topics, that demographic may go away. More often than not, it turns out the community is already interested in these things and are just waiting for the creator to catch up. So there's a lot of different ways in which we understand the sustainability of the creator business. But a lot of it has to do with understanding who we are as individuals, as humans who are constantly going through developmental changes and developing new interests. And this continues on throughout all our lives. Just as I mentioned at the very beginning, I was a Hollywood producer who then became an academic and then became a research scholar interested in the space, because I'm constantly curious about what's happening in the space. And it's been very fulfilling and satisfying. But who I am today is very different from who I was 10 years ago before I started this project, 20 years ago when I started moving into academia full time.
Very strategic indeed. Well, you've discussed about community, you discussed how to do all of this, but what would be your main message to a creator, to a new person who just started YouTube? What would you tell them to start off with? What would you say they should do in the first year? What should they prioritize?
You cannot wait to build an online community until you've settled in on who you are. You have to start from a place of where you are in terms of discovery. But there are a number of strategies that creators engage in, both in terms of content creation, platform moderation and management, brand and entrepreneurialism and commercial interactivity, and then, of course, the way in which they identify and engage with their community. These are not only very interesting and complex and challenging strategies, but more importantly, these are strategies that change constantly. This is an industry in which change is understood as a constant throughout their time. So creators have learned how to accommodate and deal with the need to pivot to many different strategies as platforms change, regulations change, the economic conditions, sociocultural conditions. These are all, it's a perpetual state of disruption that creators are always living in. So you may settle in on a strategy that works very well in the first year. It may not work as well in the second year. So being prepared to constantly pivot around strategy while also staying more faithful and honest with yourself and with your community about what interests you is, I think, the best advice I have to offer for early career creators.
Sure, people are gonna love this. So we've talked about community, staying relevant, being yourself. And someone like Mr. Beast, as you said, right? Gamified content and all of that. Honestly, when I go to maybe some people or like some friends, no one really watches Mr. Beast, maybe for the latest video or something. How do you think Mr. Beast can stay consistent over the next 20 years? Because by experience from other people, especially my age, we just really watch the latest video or we watch every single video. We don't necessarily enjoy it. It's just we really want to watch it. That's my experience personally. But what do you think Mr. Beast could do to stay consistent the next 20 years? And do you think he'll stay consistent, or do you think there's going to be something new entirely in the whole economy?
Another complex question. So the first thing I would say is that one of the biggest challenges about doing this research and also teaching students is that you all have your own relationship to creators and platforms, and that is how you've come to understand and define not only the world itself, but also this industry. So when you refer to you and your friends watching a certain type of content, yes, that sort of relationship that you have to the platforms themselves, to this industry is important. But we're talking about an industry that is now able to reach 5.7 billion people, which is 3/4 of the population of the planet. And we're talking about an industry now that is operating across 2 platform systems, mostly US and Chinese owned platform systems that are constantly engaged in a series of battles over technological advancement and success and constantly evolving underlying technological features like algorithmic control and content moderation. So there are a number of variables here that need to be factored into this. I think the ability of Mr. Beast to succeed over the next 10 years is predicated on his fundamental understanding that this is an industry that is constantly changing. So he's able to be even at huge scale that he is right now, he's constantly exploring different ways to generate content, build a community, engage a community. And
Evolving, said.
yeah, but I would say that predicting where the industry is going to be in 10 years is harder than it's ever been before, in part because we used to have some data about the way the media industries have changed in the last 100 years. We've seen Hollywood go from film to TV, from broadcast to cable, and now streaming services. But you could start to see a certain pattern in the way that that industry was disrupted. I don't think those patterns work anymore because everything is being so disrupted these days and so massively disrupted, both by new technologies, new streaming services, AI, of course, but also larger sociocultural and economic and political conditions out in the world that are putting a lot of pressures on creators, where creators may get trapped behind their national firewalls or are being shut down by very real concerns about what social media is doing in society that doesn't take into account how creators have built their whole business on the platforms. So yeah, there's just a tremendous amount of precarity in this entire industry, but there's also spectacular opportunity to, as you've revealed in your business as well, reach out to and ask questions to people who you think are interesting and have something valuable to say. So I want to thank you again for including me in your work.
Thank you so much. Today has really been amazing, especially learning about the creator economy and really understanding deeply how you can build a community, why it's so important, and really also advice for our viewers here. But really, just thank you so much for today. It was really amazing interviewing you. Really easy too. And yeah, I hope, do you have anything to say? Or honestly, I've asked all my questions.
I think the only thing to say is that creators have both rights and accountability. A lot of creators haven't fully come to recognize that they are incredibly valuable to the growth of the digital economy, but also to the way in which culture is represented. And that means they should be protected. They should be sponsored. They should be subsidized. They should be nurtured. They should be respected by the platforms, governments, and the brands. But at the same time, they have a tremendous amount of accountability. They yield great power. So all it takes is a cell phone to change the world these days. And creators are particularly successful at harnessing these technologies, but they also need to be responsible. So at the same time, they have rights, they also have responsibilities. And I hope that in the next 10 years, we start to see that sort of paradigm feature more prominently in the way this economy and this industry evolves.
Well, do you have a message for the viewers before we end off?
I think Ettan is a great example of why curiosity is the most important value in the growth and progress of humanity. So I want to thank you for bringing so many important people and their knowledge to the world and sharing it.
Real pleasure. Yeah. I love doing this. But yeah, thank you so much. Okay. Well, have an amazing day, Dr. Professor Craig. And yeah, just
take care. Thanks, Ettan.